with new pressure on Trump aides over their plots to directly overthrow the election. At this week's hearing to hold Trump veteran Peter Navarro in contempt, there was a moment there where Congressman Aguilar charted a path from Navarro's attempted coup all the way up to Trump. And since that contempt vote, the committee is continuing the pressure. And that brings us to a text chain. That was a text written to then Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, and it's making waves right now. This was sent on January 3rd, 2021. You probably haven't seen it before, based on what we think we know, as this is all pretty new. And that was during, of course, the tense and pitched lead up to January 6th, the certification and what would become the insurrection. And here is the text. Mark, I'm reaching out because I have details on the call that Navarro helped convene yesterday with legislators as part of his effort to get Pence to delay certification of the election for 10 days, including that the president participated. We'll come back to that. And then the person closes by asking, were you on the call when the president spoke? Now, that is a big piece of evidence. It shows that people at the time were trying to nail down how Donald Trump was participating actively in demanding these legislators help steal the lawful election, and that it was directly part of Navarro's plan to hijack the January 6th certification. And if you've watched The Beat, you may have heard about this. The idea was thwarted, but the idea was that they could somehow create the appearance of chaos or delay from Mike Pence at the certification, and that would help them with a possible coup. Now, Trump's been caught in some parts of trying to overthrow the election, like shaking down Georgia's elections official. That's something that he's still under investigation for there. Or pressing Mike Pence to help, which he did repeatedly and on Twitter going into the 6th. But the new evidence links Trump more directly to something that seemed perhaps curious at the time. Why would Peter Navarro confess about this plan? And why was he so specific about exactly who would be involved in abusing the vice president's power to ultimately stop the lawful and peaceful transition of power?
The plan was simply this. We had over 100 congressmen and senators on Capitol Hill ready to implement the sweep. The remedy was for Vice President Pence, as the quarterback in the Green Bay sweep, to remand those votes back to the 6 battleground states.
Do you realize you are describing a coup?
No.
He calls it a sweep. He says it was what him and Bannon were going to do, and that even if they were victorious and somehow did stop democracy and end the transition of power, that it wouldn't be a coup. That's his take. But more importantly than how he describes it is what it is. And there are people who watch that and said, oh, is that some person inflating their own role or after the fact or what their motivations may be? And that's why the evidence matters. Interviews, sources, claims, these are all pieces. But when you can reconstruct it at the time, you suddenly learn what was going on. Donald Trump was involved in what Navarro was doing. And that's why today we can show you the committee is demanding Navarro comply with its lawful subpoena. We've heard that before. But they're citing this very text, saying it's time for him to address his, quote, role in the attempt to overturn the election. Now, Meadows went from partially cooperating and handing over some documents to then going silent to then, according to the committee, defying. I've mentioned on the program he may have some better privilege claims, but he's been held in contempt, too, by Congress. The DOJ has to decide what to do. As this week ends, after these contempt votes, we see that this is an investigation that has more and more receipts. These are just some that are coming out. For example, I can tell you as someone who's been involved in following this, reporting on it, that if Navarro were cooperating, we wouldn't necessarily have that text in public this week. It was private and part of their investigation. It's only being used as they have to build a case because you have to write down what the contempt case is, and then the Attorney General has to decide whether to indict on it. So some of what we're learning is only a product of the defiance. Much of what we don't know yet is a product of the cooperation because they're bringing it all together. And amidst all of that, you have, of course, the bombshell discovery about the White House call logs. Again, thanks to the committee's investigation, we learned 7 hours are missing from that key day, and that has put more pressure on. Now officials tell CBS News that there was a very messy record-keeping process when Trump was president. Notes from calls that would be scribbled on top of the private schedule. Here's one that, again, has been obtained through the investigation. You see at the top, sort of, the schedule has become a placeholder for some of those calls. You can see a reference in longhand to V. POTUS and Senator Loeffler. Now, in that CBS account, the reporter spoke to an official who said things got missed, and saying sometimes the handwritten notes would be sent directly to the diarist and not go through the official process. Axios reports more details about who was keeping those records. It was an executive assistant, Molly Michael, and one official said she was just gone most of the day, and by the time she arrived late in the afternoon, the White House was an expletive show. So you take this together and you see that the investigation works. There are many calls for more action and more accountability, which is understandable. In fact, Attorney General Garland was pressed about that in public today, and I'm going to show you that detail in a minute. But whether people like the timeline or not, or they think the committee is getting it all done fast enough or not, or whether the DOJ is involved enough or not, we are learning just how high the effort at the coup went. According to some of these texts, it went all the way to the top. Let's bring in our experts tonight. Former RNC Chair Michael Steele has a long-time experience in the Republican Party. He did endorse Joe Biden in the last election. Former Watergate prosecutor and MSNBC analyst Jill Wine-Banks is very steeped in political prosecution and political corruption cases. Welcome back to both of you.
Good to see you.
Thank you for having us.
Jill is going to handle the law. I'm going to start with Michael, though, on the org chart. You've been around this town for a while, Michael. When the chief of staff is texting or having contact with people about POTUS being in on something like this before the 6th, what does that tell you? Whatever one thinks of Mr. Navarro and the way he talks, this would appear to be a contemporaneous log that shows POTUS was involved all the way up before the 6th.
Again, I go to a very fundamental piece that is operational with Donald Trump all the time. Nothing happens unless he wants it to happen. You don't have Mark Meadows, you don't have Peter Navarro, you don't have anybody out here talking about trying to orchestrate, manufacture, create, or execute a coup, an insurrection, unless that is something that the president himself, Donald Trump, wants to happen. It does not surprise me. And you're going to see many more pieces of evidence, the receipts, if you will, that are going to show just how involved the president was. Because from my own experience with him, nothing happens in his orbit unless he knows about it. It just doesn't. It does not happen any other way. You've heard Michael Cohen, you've heard his niece, you've heard others sort of verify that second, third, firsthand, whatever. That is a key part of this. And so to your intro about how this is becoming more evident and how it's unfolding, I think, and Joe can really speak to this, it puts an enormous amount of pressure on the Justice Department now, because all those little pieces are filling out one hell of a puzzle. And it is a very damning puzzle. And as I said, it doesn't happen unless Donald Trump wants it to happen. And as a result of that, everybody has a little chit here that when you pull all of it together, Ari, you get a better, clearer picture of exactly what the president started to orchestrate. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw this go back to April, May of 2020.
You mentioned Garland. Let's take a listen to how he was questioned in his response today.
There's been so much criticism of the Justice Department around the January 6th investigation, and a lot of people trying to pressure the department to either work faster or even to investigate specific individuals. How would you respond to that pressure and to those critics?
Look, the only pressure I feel, and the only pressure that our line prosecutors feel, is to do the right thing. That means we follow the facts and the law wherever they may lead.
That's the latest response. It's a reminder, Jill, that he's certainly aware of this. He didn't say, oh, what are you talking about? He took it as a factual premise that people are demanding more from him based on the evidence or whatever their views are. Do you see this evidence adding to the case for a criminal approach to the thwarted coup?
This is a very important piece of evidence, and criminal cases are built, as you just said, by putting pieces of a puzzle together, and each one adds to the other, and you cross-check them. And you've had Peter Navarro on admitting on your show that he had done what you described as plan a coup. and everybody would conclude that. So yes, this does add to the pressure. It certainly adds to the pressure of holding in contempt Peter Navarro for not cooperating, because it shows a really good reason why he has key information about what the president knew and when did he know it and what was his role in it beyond just knowing about it. What did he do? He spoke to that group according to that text message. So it is very, very damaging to the president and very damaging to the lack of action. I've been in that group that has said justice delayed is justice denied, and that the Department of Justice needs to act faster. I'm very encouraged by the recent revelation that there are over 100 more prosecutors being hired, and that the scope of the investigation in the federal grand jury in D.C. is expanded beyond the people who broke into the Capitol to those who planned and funded it. Those are good things that make me feel a little more comfortable about my beloved Department of Justice doing the right thing and doing, as Merrick Garland just said in that clip, following the law and the facts to wherever they lead. And they seem to be leading at every aspect to President Trump.